Welcome back to another special edition of Irish Illustrated Insider, where we focus on last night's release of the college football playoff rankings. I'm Tim O'Malley, joined by Tim Priester and Drew Mentok of Irish Illustrated. John Bryce is en route to New York City for this week's game between Notre Dame and Army. And guys, not a lot of surprises this time through. I think that's kind of reserved for the first one and some overreactions in the second. Not to say we agree with where people are, but at this point, Priester, if you remember last week, we were talking about how in the world is Penn State here and why is Texas there and who's left out. The movement seemed pretty standard to me. You could forecast a lot of what happened, whether you agree or not.
Yeah, I mean, look, and Texas and Penn State are going to have opportunities to prove or disprove themselves coming up. And I think Penn State and Minnesota this weekend's an interesting one. But I had thought, I think I did. I wrote it in my point after on Sunday that Notre Dame would definitely move up to seventh and probably could move up to sixth. It still leaves them in a eight slot hosting, or I guess moves them up to an eight slot hosting. When you see the name Alabama across from them, it strikes a little fear in your heart. But this isn't, I mean, I think I would be really interested to see that matchup in Notre Dame Stadium. And so there was some speculation, Tim, about the point spread for that game, and even that indicated it's a promising matchup for Notre Dame.
Yeah, Drew brought this to our attention, so I'll go to Drew with this one. This is, I think, the one time Notre Dame fans since 2012 can see Alabama and not go, okay, well, the season's over. So this is one time where the matchup is something that could not. It's like your first choice if you're a Notre Dame fan, but that it could work out okay.
Still got to stop Milroe.
Yeah,
you got to stop Milroe, but.
And Ryan Williams. But yeah, the Colin Wilson, who's a senior editor with Action Network, so like a sports gambling centric website, put out his like projected lines for the first four playoff matchups and had Alabama at Notre Dame as a pick-em. So he thinks this is a pretty, especially at home and what should be favorable weather to Notre Dame. He believes this would be a close matchup. And I think what was surprising to me too is when I saw that, I was like, yeah, that actually kind of makes a lot of sense to me. And after I tweeted out last night the bracket and asked like fans, what are your thoughts on this? And it was pretty surprising too to Tim's point. Like there were a lot of people like, bring it on. Like we know this probably won't last, but I thought there'd be a little bit more maybe bedwetting or something. But I was pretty surprised at how confident people were in that projection, especially when where we were 2 months ago. I think people thought the sky was falling with this program. So people seem pretty intrigued.
I did check with one more sports bettor. I'm not sure I'm supposed to use his name this time around. I usually do if you guys want to figure it out on your own listening at home. But he said he checked with some people behind the counters and he thought ND would be plus 1.5 at neutral and around minus 1.5 as a favorite over Alabama at home in a playoff game. I think the issue, and I don't want to spend much time on this next one because the number one thing that's going to happen is this bracket's going to change over the next week and the next 2 weeks and the next 3 weeks. Like the least likely thing is that this is what the bracket looks like. If you were to come up with something and you were to come up with something and I were, we'd all be just as likely as what it currently exists right now. Alabama and then feeding into Oregon is not the most wonderful start because you got that getting out of that 8-9, Tim Priester. Well, getting out of 8, you don't want to fall to 9. Getting out of 8 is an important thing.
It's like that. It's like an NCAA basketball tournament when you're in that 8-9 slot, you're going to get the number one seed in that regional, and that's not ideal. But it is what it is for now. And look, Notre Dame has a chance. Army USC. You win those two games, that's going to show a lot. I think in the committee's eyes, you're going to like you're not going to move up to fifth probably, but it may solidify your spot a little bit more. And I don't want to get into Army too much, but I think Army's a very dangerous team, quicker and stronger than I've ever seen an Army team be. But yeah, I don't want to get into that too much right now. You want to argue about Penn State being number 4 again, because that's.
I was going to ask you guys, I put this in Monday Musings, so I want you to quibble because you're not going to have giant disagreements right here. So I actually did guess the first 16. I don't know. That means I'm not saying those are my 16 from last night's rankings. Now,
as to what they would be.
Yes, to what they would end up being. I don't know how that worked out because honestly, if I tried to guess the first one, I bet I only got Oregon and Ohio State right out of everything. So this is a giant improvement from reading the committee's mind. I wrote should be a little lower and go ahead to quibble because I think you agree, at least a little bit. Texas, Penn State, and maybe I said Clemson a touch. I don't think they matter anymore, but so Texas and Penn State should be a little lower. Drew, do you agree?
Yeah, definitely. I think they may have helped Penn State a little bit. I think they beat Illinois, and so they pushed them into the top 25, which gives them now a ranked win. But I still don't think Texas has one, and they're, best team. I know they played Michigan when we still thought Michigan was going to be a quality opponent and whatnot. But yeah, the best team they played at home was Georgia, and they lost by I think 15. So I think both of those teams, I would have them lower. But I think at the end of the day, like you wouldn't drop them
Too far.
it's hard to drop them lower than Notre Dame when I think people still hold that Northern Illinois loss against them. I watched the start of that Northern Illinois Miami game yesterday, and I think Reese Davis called them the Irish beating Huskies or slaying Huskies. So that reputation isn't going away.
Yeah, well, they got slayed last night by Chuck
Yeah.
Martin, so that's not good. I realize Miami's 9-1, and so that's why they're
Tim, do you
number
agree
eight.
though? Those guys should be a little lower. You think they're fine at 3 and 4? Texas and Penn State.
Well, I mean, I think we've already argued in past weeks that they probably shouldn't be there based upon resume. I mean, based upon who they have beaten. I hate the phrase they haven't beaten anybody. I think that's always a little too extreme, but as it relates to what we're talking about here, I think that's a little bit high. Miami, I'm just saying Miami is a team that at number 8, I'm not sure that they belong there. I know they have a high-powered offense, but their defense,
That's one of my questions, actually. I have a
yeah,
full list for you here. It should be a
okay.
little higher, SMU. And I said a little higher also. And remember, it doesn't really matter yet, but I said Army too. Should be a little bit higher.
Oh wow.
Just
Well,
a
they
little.
did. They moved up 5 spots to 19.
I'm
So
saying I think they should be a little bit higher.
a little bit higher than that. Look, I get it because they like when you're watching an Army game and you're just watching Army, they pass the eye test. But when you're beating UAB and Tulsa and East Carolina and these teams they are horrible. They're horrible. You could take away the wins that Army had against all their opponents, and all those opponents would still combine for 15 or 17 games under 500. They're terrible. Their offenses are terrible, and that's largely why Army stats are as good as they are. Again, however, when you watch Army play, they play fast. They're physical. I'm sitting there watching them for about 90 minutes the other night, and I'm like, damn. And it's just the size of their lines, and that's why, Tim, this is why I think I realize it more now. But when you were saying Navy is going to be tougher than Army, and I completely understood that, but I just felt like Army, and Bryce has said this, 11th year of Jeff Monken, he's done a great job. That program is on really, really solid embedded footing, and they're big and strong along the lines, and their secondary is very quick. They have 14 interceptions. They've only turned the ball over 3 times. You better hit Bryson Daly time after time after time. You need to try to beat him out of the game. They're good. They're good. There's just no other way of putting it.
Drew, I was going to ask, I struggle to decide and on these 4 teams, plus Boise State a little bit, because Boise State has, if you have a good loss, Boise State has a good loss. But
Yeah.
the four SEC teams, I mean, they all beat each other.
Right.
It's a very difficult thing. Not Texas, but the real SEC teams, not the fake one. Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia, and Tennessee.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting that they put Alabama ahead of Miami and not the other 3. Like I kind of curious what the justification was for that because it
I
seems
agree
like
with that,
it's
Drew.
hard to
Yeah,
not
that's
just group
strange.
those all together. Especially since they all just beat each other and they've all won some games handily and I don't know that it's I mean not that they necessarily play similarly, but I feel like they all have very similar resumes. So
And is Tennessee or is Alabama so far ahead of Tennessee because of the eye test?
So, did you guys read the transcript? I know when you try to watch the playoff, when you try to watch them talk, it's just a word salad. I read it back, and it's still a word salad. It's so contradictory of everything they're saying. At some point, they threw in for Alabama. Well, we also looked at the last 3 weeks just for Alabama. Like
Yeah.
you're only looking at the last 3 weeks for Alabama. So what's Texas done the last 3 weeks? Is it Notre Dame great in the last 3 weeks? It's just such a strange way of doing things. And if you were to read it back, you're like, they have not said a single justification of any of the questions they were asked. Now, most questions were about Ole Miss, Georgia, Alabama, because those are hard to figure out. I get it. But I
Yeah.
don't think they have a criteria. I think they're just going to decide and hope after the SEC championship game that it's pretty obvious.
True.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I mean, it's kind of hard to listen to some of those interviews and follow it along, to be honest. So
Former Notre Dame recruit Ward Manuel that went to Michigan.
yeah, so I think I mean, and they did mention the one thing that I guess did stand out to me is that they felt their like the eye test and watching the games is the most important thing to them. That some of the metrics and things that some of us might look at, they are watching the games. I think they said before the season they got iPads, and they're loading up all the games like kind of truncated so they can just kind of speed through them in like 45 minutes or an hour or whatever, just take away a lot of the dead time. So I think they're watching all the games, and I think they just must view looking at it, I guess, that Alabama is that much better than those other three. But
This is
And
hard. It's hard, man.
it
It's
is.
hard,
I just hope they don't do what it seems like they're always going to do. At some point, all of a sudden, the eye test becomes, well, who would be favored in Vegas? I don't care. They're supposed to go with what's happened a little bit, right?
Yeah.
I mean, who would be favored in Vegas cannot be your fallback plan on December 8th every year.
yeah, otherwise we could just use the SP plus rankings or whatever and just say like close close losses where you look like you got unlucky matter just as much as wins almost because USC is still a top 20 25 team with them too. So yeah, I think if I think they do get sometimes a little too far away from the resumes actually mattering and wins counting in the way they should.
Priester, I'm going to bring it to you here. I'm going to ask you for an actual upset, and then to be fair, I'm going to ask you for a couple. Oh, why don't you just do both answers for a couple you could see? So to be clear, Tim Priester is not picking all these upsets, but what is your upset, and then what are a couple others where you think, well, this might happen or it's coming down to the wire?
I
This week,
really
I'm sorry, everybody. This weekend,
this week
this weekend, yeah.
I really I really do like Minnesota. I know the line's 12, the 12 and a half. That's a bunch at home. But PJ Fleck is they're going to play well. I think they're going to go toe to toe with Penn State. And so I think that is one. Now, Arizona State is hosting BYU, and it's not an upset. It wouldn't be an upset. Arizona State is favored by 3, but I think at this stage of the process, I think most people would look at that and say, that would be you would consider that an upset since BYU has been up there. But Drew, we were talking about before we started recording that BYU has struggled here recently, and so in Arizona State they snuck up on me. They're 8-2 for crying out loud, and where'd they move them up to 21st? And I think they're deserving of that. Everybody says great things about Kenny Dillingham, and so you feel good about that. But I realize that that's not a true upset. But I think Arizona State will win that game. I know there's a lot of talk about SMU at Virginia. You had that on your list, did you not, Tim, of games to consider?
Yeah, anybody that's in this top 14.
Yeah, SMU's not going to lose at Virginia.
I don't think they will either. So this is pretty interesting. This is from Tim Murray. Notre Dame opponents are 0-8 in the game following playing Notre Dame against the spread. Florida State did not play. Florida State
I wonder what
play.
through the year. I bet I don't know. It's been quite that drastic through the years, but I bet that ask Northern Illinois what what it's
Marshall.
like after
Same thing
playing
happened to Marshall.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
How about you, Drew? What do you have an upset for sure this week that you would take? And then are there a couple others to look at?
I'm kind of leaning towards I kind of like the way Kansas has been playing recently, and they're only, 2.5 point underdogs at home to Colorado. I think maybe the fact that they have been playing well, it's going to be harder for them to sneak up on Colorado. Maybe they did against some opponents over the last 2 weeks, but I think if I had to pick a team, which again, it's 2.5 points, but I think that would be the game.
I agree with that one, Drew, and I had marked that down. This is A&M is at Auburn, and Auburn is so unpredictable and up and down, mostly down. But A&M's only a 2.5 point favorite at Auburn. So, I mean, just looking at the lines and the Kansas Colorado game's another good example of that. I think of those two games, I would agree with Kansas, just because I know that they've got an excellent coach that can get them to rise up at any time. And I'm not sure that Auburn, you never know when Auburn's prepared to do something like that.
Anyone on the IU train?
I'm not. I'm not. I mean,
Loss or
I
just
have.
you don't see a
Well, I mean,
Ohio
I
State
like. I don't.
covering. Ohio State covering, I guess, is your thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think IU could, I don't see IU winning the game outright. And I'm not, I think they're slotted where they deserve to be. I think they've earned that. That's where they say they haven't, when people say they haven't played anybody, they're in the Big Ten. I think that point was being made last night. For crying out loud, they're in the Big Ten. I realize they haven't played the front runners, the same as Army hasn't played Tulane and Memphis in the AAC, which might be a different situation if they did. Um, tons of respect for Kurt Signetti, and I think they'll play tough, but I don't think they're going to win at Ohio State. You guys?
No, I mean, I'm kind of, they need to kind of prove it. Their toughest game, I think, has been Michigan, and they kind of struggled there. And I think this isn't the Michigan team of the last 2 years. Like, I think Ohio State can kind of match that physicality and is way more talented too. So we'll see. I mean, if IU plays well, I'm not going to be shocked, but I also just, they still have to prove it, and this is their chance to do it.
Who do you have, Tim?
I think they will play well and lose as well. I think that I also wonder if at some point the moment's going to be a little big. Not to compare them to Navy and Notre Dame because that's drastic in terms of your physical ability too. But I wonder if that moment in Columbus is a little big, and I can't see it being a little big at all for Ohio State at home. I mean, if this game was at Indiana, it would get really interesting because it would be absolutely wild.
Yeah.
Scene. That would, but I hope IU doesn't lose because the moment was too big and they had some tragic beginning to the game and they played pretty well after going down 17-0 early or something like that. Actually, Notre Dame fans could probably just use Penn State and Iowa or Indiana to lose, to be clear. I mean, it's no fun to root for Ohio State here, but they're going to get some benefit of the doubt along the way. Mine is Minnesota as well. Just from 3 weeks ago, I was surprised the line was that high. I thought they'd tempt everybody in the world with 9.5.
I mean, don't you, PJ Fleck?
Yeah,
I
don't have much faith in Penn State as part of my.
Yeah, no doubt. You don't have the Citadel over Clemson, or
no, I left those
Wofford over
out, but
South
I
Carolina?
do wonder. I do wonder. I looked up all those teams actually to see if they're all 2-8. Like UTEP's 2-8. Every team I was looking up was 2-8.
Alabama played Mercer last week, and
Yeah.
Mercer was 8-1 or 9-1 going into the game.
I do wonder if Florida is playing well enough to keep that game low scoring, and then something weird can happen against Ole Miss. They're getting 10 at home. That was if I was forced to pick another one, that was going to be the one. But Kansas and Minnesota were the two that I think might just pull the trigger and say they're going to win the game. Harder question here. All right. Of the teams in, so SMU is not in. Who won't make it?
Well, Miami, because SMU is going to beat Miami in the ACC championship
That's
game.
exactly the question. That's exactly the answer I'm looking for. So Miami is your team that's out.
Yeah.
Do you have one out, Drew?
I'm kind of wondering. Oh wait, no, Tennessee's not in right now.
Right. That's tough. Because that's you can still answer that one. They're in the top 12.
But I kind of feel like them being the last of those three teams. Plus, there's always the chance that like Texas A&M beats Texas or something. Like I feel like them being the fringe of those, I mean, 5 SEC teams in the top 11 is a bad sign for them because it's really hard to see that many getting in. So I think them sliding them at the back half of those teams with the same record is tough for them.
And I have Arizona State beating BYU. BYU is a 12th seed right now. I have BYU as being out as well.
Yeah, actually, I have both BYU and Miami as being out. That was kind of why I came up with the question. Is I don't.
No, it's a good one.
You're more likely to not have what you have now. Everybody's looking at Alabama and Oregon on the ride. Well, don't worry about that. Never works out that way.
But it is a, your heart
intriguing,
skips
yes.
your heart skips a beat when you see it flash on the screen.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. It's like you felt like it was what was it, March 17th, and you're watching the NCAA tournament. You're like, Notre Dame got in. They get Duke. It's that feeling right there. Before we wrap up, I wanted to ask. So actually, I guess this follow-up question on that is SMU does get in. They're the one out of it. Um, really, at this point, Drew, I wanted you to quickly, because we have a lot of questions on the board. I'm sorry, this is very technical. Why in the world are the seeds this way? I thought the four power conferences get the top four. It's not that way. Can Drew, you explain how the actual seeding works? I'm glad you brought up Tennessee is not technically in, even though they're in the top 12.
Yeah. So the way I understand it is it's the top four ranked conference champions.
Yeah. So it doesn't have to be power four top rank. It doesn't have to be the power four in the top four.
Right.
I think a lot of people on the board are wondering why in the world that is a group. The group of five can be ranked higher than the Big 12.
Yeah, but BYU was there and Boise
Yeah,
State is there right now.
Yeah, so it's I mean, I think it's a hard thing to watch sometimes for casual fans watching the playoff bracket because it's not the bracket, like the bracket's different than the rankings. It's just so much different than it was in previous seasons.
Well, and that's why I've admitted, I don't know if I admitted it on here or our regular Irish Illustrated Insider, but when I heard 12-team playoff, great, more teams are involved. It's still going to be the same damn four teams, that were going to get in anyway if you only had four. But I wasn't taking into account, the seedings
Yeah.
where a 9-3 ACC team would be a 4 seed. I wasn't thinking of it in those terms, and so all the more genius part of this concept, which Jack Swarbrick and Aaron Horvath and the Notre Dame people had, it certainly had something to do with coming up with this 12-team playoff. But so yeah, I mean, I'm a lot more open-minded about who can end up being the final four as opposed to when you first hear the concept of it.
I think it also helps where I was complaining about the word salads and how all of a sudden you're going to say this team is better because they'd be favored in Vegas. If you're holding seeds for people, that is one way to avoid just the absolute setup of whatever the committee wants. I'm not saying the committee plans going in, but I do think there's panic at the end every once in a while. They just say, "Oh, wait a minute, how can we have Alabama and Ohio State back here?" It doesn't matter that they lost; they're better than those teams. So this at least offsets that a little bit.
And I think that, like the concept of having a 9-3 team among the top four, generally among the fan bases, they don't like that. But you have to understand the powers that be are making these decisions, and they're always going to accede to the power four conferences. And then, they've also made allowances for group of five. That's just the way it's going to be. They're never going to, exclude a power four conference just because they won the conference and they're 8-4 or 9-3. That's the way this is always going to be, as far as I can tell.
We'll
Yeah.
have another. Oh, go ahead, Drew.
I was saying I like it because if we just had like four Big Ten teams and
Yeah.
five SEC teams
Right.
and maybe Notre Dame and Miami or whatever, I guess it's only 11. But like I like that it diversifies it a little bit and it's not so located to these certain regions still or certain conferences. So I think that makes it more interesting and I feel more excited about like following it than I would if
Mhm.
just knew it would kind of be this cluster of teams. So
Well, for instance, Tennessee would not be sitting out right now. They would be pretty comfortably in if they just were
yeah.
able to beat Vanderbilt at the end of the season and not have to play a conference championship game. So I think that helps a lot. We'll have another. Oh,
I
sorry. Go
did,
ahead,
you know
Tim.
what, Tim? One more point. I did one, and I wrote this down last night because we're hearing some pushback on conference championship games, especially from the SEC. Again, powers that be, I don't think I have a hard time picturing them scrapping conference championship games because it's another payday for them.
It's a
And
huge
right,
payday.
it's a
Yeah.
huge payday, and I don't know exactly how much, but it's significant enough that I don't think they're going to change it. However, would it not be best in the best interest of college football if you eliminated those? It would certainly benefit Notre Dame because now Notre Dame would be back on equal footing and would be able to get a top four seed, assumably. That's how that would be determined. I don't think that's going to happen, but I mean, would you guys agree with that? Or that in the best
Yeah.
interest of college football, that would be eliminated, the
I wrote
conference?
about this before the 12-team playoff came out that if you're ever going to expand, I thought eight. This is like 6-7 years ago. That I thought eight would be the first expansion 6-7 years ago, not 12. That if you're going to do that, you need to get rid of conference championship games. And first of all, like the Big Ten and the ACC conference championship game have been around for 10 minutes. It's not like you can't get rid of those things. The SEC and Big 12 back in the day when they had the conference for real are deeply rooted traditions. If you're going to say they've been around, I mean, the SEC's been around for now 29, 30 years for a conference championship game, 28 years. Big 12, I remember watching some in 1999, 2000. It's the new ones where you're like, I mean, name the first Big Ten championship game you watched. You don't.
Yeah,
know.
I think
It's not.
I think the SEC would offer the most pushback as to
Yes.
eliminating a conference championship game.
Even if they just wanted to say our history, they could push back with that.
And sometimes I feel like that narrative is driven. I mean, I don't know this for sure, but I feel like it's like Kirby Smart and Lane Kiffin saying a lot of stuff. And I think they're upset that IU and Penn State and some of these teams are so far ahead of them when they've played a much tougher schedule. So sometimes I feel like it's, well, we might have to lead to more change if you don't like view us how we think we should be viewed, kind of thing. I don't know that for sure, but I do think it is a way to drive the narrative that's not just them whining.
We'll be back tomorrow with a regular Irish Illustrated Insider podcast to preview Notre Dame's game against Army, a playoff elimination game, which is not something we planned on in August, Tim Priester, even if we thought Army might be pretty good. And actually, right after that, before the weekend, Drew Mentok will have his basically who and what to watch if you're an Irish fan trying to watch the weekend unfold and how it can affect Notre Dame, the upcoming college football playoff. Until then,
we're gonna have that. I'm sorry, Tim. We're gonna have that on Friday. We've been putting it on Saturdays. We want people to have a little bit more time to digest what they're looking for going into the weekend. I'm done.
Skip your lunch hour and read Drew Mentok's piece on that because that's a lot more fun. For Tim Priester and Drew Mentok of Irish Illustrated, I'm Tim O'Malley. Thanks for joining us on edition number 3 of the Irish Illustrated Insider Playoff Podcasts.